Hi, my name is Christie Nicholson, and we're here in New York City at the Brain Mind event with Dr. Charles Lim. The title of the event is Your Brain on Art, How the Arts Transform Us. So, Dr. Lim, it's so great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
You are a surgeon, a neuroscientist, and I'm going to take this next word very carefully, and a professor of otolaryngology.
Well
Thank
done.
God I got it. All right, at the University of California in San Francisco. And you're also a musician, and you play several instruments?
I do, yes. I'm a saxophonist by training.
Oh, saxophone for sure, and then
Yeah.
piano and bass?
Yes, exactly.
Maybe we should start off, because we said that big term, and some people might know it has something to do with the head and neck, but
Yes.
otolaryngology,
So
what is that?
Most people think of it as ear, nose, throat medicine, kind of colloquially, but I myself specialize in the part that has to do with hearing. So I'm particularly an ear and hearing specialist, and I'm a hearing restoration specialist. So most of the work that I do is to help people that can't hear try to hear again.
Right, and I want to really get into that because I want to talk about the Cochlear implant, one of the oldest brain-computer interfaces that we have. But before we get there, the interesting thing is you really delve into beyond even the biology of sound, but get into the physics of it. And so what is going on when we hear music? And maybe we can go a little further because music is abstract. And how is it different from when we hear language?
So thanks for the question. This is something that I've been thinking about, I think maybe since the moment I really came to live and know that I had conscious thoughts, which is that every time I heard music, it took me to some other place. You know, I'd be listening to music and be like, wow, this is just amazing. And then I started to wonder, wow, how does that happen? And you could easily just leave it there, just say, how does that happen? It's like kind of cool. But I kind of was fascinated by that question, and trying to answer it started to feel more and more important to me. And so when I eventually chose a career in medicine and realized that there was a field of medicine that studied hearing and sound, I was kind of hooked. And I guess I would put it to you this way. A lot of things have to go right in order for us to hear music, but our brains and bodies work so well that it's kind of effortless. In particular, the ear's job is to take sound, which is vibrations in the air, and to convert them ultimately into electricity. And so that is the kind of first phase that happens inside our ear canals, eardrum, middle ear, inner ear, is this capturing of the vibrations. But then beyond that, acoustics stops existing. Okay? When you're actually hearing sound, it's not sound waves bouncing around in your skull. It's electricity that's representing the sound you just heard going into your brainstem, going up the brainstem, going to your higher brain centers, and your brain is reconstructing it in this kind of image, this auditory image of what you just heard in the room.
It's really strange when you say into this image. It's pieces of electricity. The electricity is the neurons firing, and it just like pixels?
So you can think about it in a number of ways. If you kind of think about it structurally, sound can be broken up into various parts. And it's almost mathematics. You could just look at it as a low pitch to high pitch, like a frequency thing, and you can think about it how it changes over time. And so if you just look at those two things alone in a very crude way, if your brain gets that information, meaning the correct frequencies at the correct time, it can start reconstructing what the sound of, say, the guitar in the room actually sounded like, so that your brain allows you to perceive it correctly.
And what happens, because you said it's so sensitive, and you've said before that even if a slight change in pitch and the whole thing is wrecked, I mean, is it like a Princess and the Pea kind of situation where everything has to be, to feel the smallest thing?
I would say it this way. In order to have perfect hearing, meaning an exact rendition of what took place in the room, all these things have to go correctly. But that's why not everybody has that, and there's different kinds of hearing loss. And the other thing is that when you mutate either spoken language or art or music in a small way, it may not be catastrophic to it. So let's take a voice, right? So let's say your voice is transposed in my head. You don't know this, but my brain has it up a half step. In the end, I'm still hearing you. I'll never know that that's not actually your real voice, because it's not a catastrophic mutation. It's just kind of like a little bit of a transposition. But there are some things that if eventually you have all the pitches wrong and all the time is wrong, then it becomes so degraded that you literally cannot hear it for what it was meant to be.
And so it doesn't happen as much with language, but music is just more
complicated. So if you're trying to faithfully transmit music, many more things have to be correct. Whereas for speech, it's very redundant, it's acoustically, in a way, compact. and it's easier to get speech right. That's why a telephone is fine for speech, but how many people want to go listen to music on a telephone? You just don't want to do that. It doesn't sound right.
No, you're right. And this ties us to the cochlear implant, which I mentioned, is you mentioned this before. I heard you say that hearing is one of the biggest things of all the senses that we can correct for at this point. But it also fails to get music right. Is that why?
It's one of the ironies of how successful we are with hearing restoration. So if you were to lose any sense, deafness is the one that we have something medically, surgically to offer that's really quite good. But what it's good at is predominantly speech. And so if you try to give music back to someone through a cochlear implant, that implant struggles. It's almost like it's asking too much of the device to be able to transmit such a sophisticated level of sound to the listener. So you kind of learn that the kind of acoustic and maybe abstract and conceptual requirements of music kind of exceed those of speech. And so this is, revolutions don't happen overnight, right? So in order for us to get to the stage where we're perfectly providing hearing back to somebody, a number of things have to go right, and we have to use music as a guidepost to get there.
And music does all kinds of other things. You've actually watched musicians inside of an fMRI and watched the brain and see them during improvisation. Earlier panelist mentioned improvisation is key. And so if you could talk a little bit about improvisation and creativity and why it's so tied to music as opposed to like when you see the brain on a script, it's very different.
As somebody who has been a jazz player, I knew kind of intuitively that when somebody is improvising musically, it's very different cognitively, intellectually, emotionally than when you're playing something that's memorized or written down for you. It's almost like a completely different exercise. They're both musical, they both require playing the instrument, but it's a different mind state.
What does it feel like?
Well, for me, there's a sense of freedom, but there's also a sense of risk. Those two things are blending together because in a way, you're going to be judged for what you play in a way that's quite different than if you're playing something someone told you to play. But the freedom is kind of intoxicating because no one is telling you what to do. So you just do what actually reflects who you are to the extent that you're able to and maybe how you're feeling at that moment. And so there's something that's very, I think, authentic about that feeling. And because I was kind of compelled by that, I wanted to understand the neurobiology of it because it seemed to me like something profound was taking place. And that's when I kind of started to understand that it was a window into this larger creative process that all humans have, whether or not you're a professional jazz musician or just trying to get to work. Our brains are constantly problem solving, improvising. In fact, I don't think we'd be alive today as a species had we not been able to improvise.
So what could we say to people in terms of, powering that creativity through improvisation? Should people practice it, harness it?
Actually, interestingly, when I've worked with a lot of professional musicians, and I'm talking about some of the greatest improvisers in the world, whether it's in music or comedy or some other forms of spontaneous creativity, they all say one thing, which is that it's not about talent, it's not about genius. Even if they may be those things, for them it was about practice. It was about practice and effort and repetition. They said in order to be able to get into the right mind state to be creative, you have to practice that over and over again so that it becomes automatic. The take home is the following. I think every human being has that to some degree, and it can be developed and practiced and probably should be much more I think our educational systems, quite honestly, we might have missed the boat on this a little bit by favoring so much didactic instruction and rote memorization and regurgitation of a certain correct, body of information. We're losing the idea of the value of somebody coming up with something on their own by just intuitive, immediate, spontaneous problem solving. And I think it's short-sighted.
Right, because thinking on the fly is something that a lot of people come to me and ask, how can I better think on the fly? And I guess like anything else, it's a muscle. And
or neurons.
Or neurons, I should call it, yeah.
But maybe what you should do is play an instrument. And maybe when you're learning to play that instrument, you should not worry so much about sheet music. You should worry about just trying to play something that sounds the way you want to sound.
You once also talked about music, being beautiful, and this sense of we do not like music that's not beautiful. Is there a lot of different types of genres of music that, is there something going on in different brains when they're like, I can't stand punk music, I like rock?
Yeah, so I think it's quite fascinating to me that there's all different forms of beauty. It's almost impossible, I think, to objectively define beauty because it's a subjective experience.
Right. Yeah.
And what gives somebody great pleasure may give somebody else an aversive experience. That's true in music and sound as it might be in food or any other number of things. But what I do find kind of compelling is that over time, your concept of beauty can mature and change. And that's a reflection that even though the art or the music itself hasn't changed, you've changed. And so let me give you an example.
Yeah.
I was listening to this album that I never really liked until I heard it 10 years after I bought it again. And I was like, what is that? And then I looked at my shelves, I was like, oh, I've had this for 10 years. And I've never known that it was really profound. And now when I listen to it, I think it's one of the most gorgeous pieces of music I've ever heard. And this is Astor Piazzolla's Tango 0 Hour.
I was going to ask you.
Changed my life. And so, it took my brain time to catch up to the music.
What do you think changed, though?
I think my openness to new ideas and my need to hear something that was familiar or the way I thought it should sound. I had to kind of dispense with that. You have to get out of your own head sometimes to appreciate the beauty in something that's not familiar to you.
Right.
I think it's a good, honestly, for me, I think it's a good lesson for humankind and how it is we interact with one another. We can be closed off to ideas and new things and new people, and I think it's to our own detriment.
Yeah, sometimes it's fear.
A lot of it, I think.
Yeah.
We're not comfortable with the unfamiliar.
Right, and the ambiguity, which we talked about, and being comfortable with ambiguity makes you stronger with thinking on the fly, leads to improvisation, better music, maybe. So I have a couple of funny questions. So
Sure.
The first one is, what is something that you really, really wish you understood?
Wow. Why time can't go backwards. So time as a dimension, I mean, people have speculated this all the time, but it goes in one direction, which is forward. And to me, it's the great tragedy of being alive is that we all have finite numbers of seconds to do so. And it's like the more time you spend doing anything, the less time you have left to live. And so I've always wondered why it's not possible to rewind time somehow.
Like a time traveler?
Yeah, I would love to be able to understand why time can't be manipulated. It's sort of like a fixed thing that we all accept that we're just going from start to finish on our own timelines, and then one day we just will pass away. But would love the idea that somehow that were a little more fluid of an idea.
But this next one might be related to it. What is something that you believe to be true, but cannot prove?
That people are good. And I feel that way through my practice of medicine. And I think it's that when people are at their most vulnerable and when they need help, in a way, it simplifies existence. And I get to see, it's a privilege, honestly, to see people that need help because you realize, and I said this today at the panel, that everybody is the same under the skin.
Yeah.
Like when I'm doing surgery, like once you get past the skin, like everybody looks the same. And so meanwhile, we have all these people with different ideas and political thoughts and there's all these divisions, but we're all very, very much similar to one another. And so I feel like having seen the good in people that I would maybe have biased myself into thinking they're bad people or they're different people to the point where we can't get along, I've learned that that's not true.
We've been at this really extraordinary day at the Brain Mind event. Would you have any observations about Brain Mind as an organization?
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. And what I like about it is that we're taking pretty high-level science concepts and marrying them in a pretty, I think, natural, authentic way to artistic concepts. My kind of goal and my ask and my kind of dream, though, is that everyone who's here already knows and loves music and art, and they all kind of agree that this is important. Meanwhile, there's a whole world of kids out there that are suffering and people that don't know that this is actually important. And I think actually pop musicians are the key right now for us to move forward. We need popular musicians that kids listen to take an interest in this and start saying, hey, you know what? Maybe although our music's fun, it's more than that. Maybe it's actually transformative.
Thank you so much for your time today. It was really, really, really amazing. And I think everyone should look into your work and your thoughts because it's really inspirational.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thanks for your time.